Let's get weird into it. Number 10. The Here Be Dragons scam. Picture this. You're a sailor in the 1500s, and you've just been handed a brand new world map. You're excited. You've got oceans to cross, riches to find, and scurvy to catch. But then you notice something weird. In the blank spots where the cartographer clearly had no idea what was actually there, instead of just leaving it empty, they drew dragons, or sea serpents, or weird giant fish that looked like they came out of a medieval acid trip. This wasn't just decoration, it was strategic lying. If a mapmaker didn't know what was beyond a coastline, they filled it with terrifying beasts to make it look intentional, because saying, no clue makes you look incompetent. Saying, beware giant kraken makes you look mysterious and authoritative. It also kept ordinary sailors from straying too far off the known trade routes. After all, if your map literally tells you there's a dragon the size of a cathedral waiting beyond that dotted line, you're probably not going to volunteer to sail past it. And kings and merchants loved this trick. By making certain routes look dangerous, they could control where sailors went, which ports they visited, and which monopolies stayed profitable. It was like using horror movie marketing to enforce economic policy. Stick to our approved shipping lane, or get eaten by medieval Godzilla. The funniest part? These fake monsters got copied from map to map, until sailors genuinely believed there were serpents curling around the edges of the world. Entire naval expeditions wasted time hunting for islands that never existed, or avoiding waters that were perfectly safe. Basically, early maps were less trustworthy science, and more fantasy fan art with an agenda. So the next time you admire one of those old parchment maps in a museum, remember, it wasn't guiding sailors toward truth. It was basically an ancient warning label that said, "Here be lies." Number 9. The China-centered all-under-heaven map. Now let's head over to China, where for centuries the world map was drawn like a giant ego circle. Instead of a globe with Europe on one side and the Americas on the other, Chinese maps placed themselves squarely in the middle, with a giant label, all under heaven. Everything else? Random outer lands clinging to the edge of the circle, like sad extras in a movie where China was clearly the main character. This wasn't a mistake. It was a cultural worldview. The Chinese Empire saw itself as the heart of civilization, so the cartography had to match. If you grew up looking at one of these maps, you genuinely believed China was the gravitational center of Earth, while places like Europe were just tiny footnotes out on the margins. Foreign nations were literally reduced to blobs with labels like Western Sea Peoples or Barbarian Lands. No borders, no details, just vague doodles to show they existed. It's a great example of how maps aren't neutral. They're psychological mirrors. In Europe, maps were being redrawn to make colonial empires look dominant. In China, maps were redrawn to reinforce the Middle Kingdom mindset. Both were less about reality and more about identity. A map wasn't a picture of the Earth. It was a picture of how a culture saw itself. The irony? When European and Chinese explorers finally started swapping maps, they were both horrified. Europeans thought Chinese maps looked like a child's drawing. Chinese officials thought European maps were upside-down nonsense. The truth is, they were both drawing propaganda with ink. So yeah, the world wasn't just shaped by geography. It was shaped by who had the pen. Number 8. The Phantom Islands That Never Were. Imagine being a sailor in the 1700s. You've been stuck at sea for weeks, eating hardtack biscuits that taste like drywall, when suddenly, land ho! You swear you see an island in the distance. You sketch it down, give it a name, maybe even add a dramatic coastline. Congratulations, you've just invented a brand new country. That doesn't exist. These so-called Phantom Islands were one of the strangest lies in cartographic history. Names like Friesland, High Brazil, and St. Brendan's Isle haunted maps for centuries. Some came from honest mistakes, optical illusions caused by fog, mirages, or volcanic ash on the horizon. Others were just sailors, straight up making stuff up because they wanted to look impressive when they got back to port. But here's the real kicker. Once an island appeared on one map, it got copied to dozens more. No one wanted to be the cartographer who said, actually, that place doesn't exist. Better to just play along. So generations of explorers wasted months searching for lands that were literally imaginary. And sometimes, mapmakers deliberately added fake islands as copyright traps. If a rival stole their map and the phony island showed up on someone else's chart, boom, plagiarism exposed. That means some sailors were navigating oceans using maps that included deliberate lies as booby traps. Imagine trusting GPS today, only to find out Google Maps invented an entire fake city just to catch Apple Maps stealing data. Eventually, expeditions crossed the same islands enough times to prove they didn't exist, and one by one, they got erased. But the ghost of those lies lingers. Even into the 20th century, official naval charts still listed phantom landmasses like Sandy Island in the Pacific, which wasn't disproven until 2012. That's right, humanity spent centuries drawing, debating, and even discovering land that was never there. So when you hear conspiracy theories about Atlantis or lost continents, just remember, sometimes the ocean didn't swallow a civilization. Sometimes it was never real in the first place. Number 7. Terra Australis, the giant myth continent. Before Antarctica was properly mapped, Europeans were obsessed with the idea that there had to be a massive southern continent to balance the Earth. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, Latin for unknown southern land. This wasn't based on evidence. It was based on vibes. Renaissance scholars believed the Earth needed symmetry. If there was a lot of land in the north, then logically there must be a giant mystery land in the south. Otherwise, the planet would, tip over? It sounds absurd now, but this pseudo-logic fueled centuries of exploration and, of course, cartographic lies. Maps from the 1500s and 1600s happily sketched Terra Australis as a massive continent, wrapping around the South Pole, often bigger than Africa. Never mind that no one had actually seen it. Cartographers just drew it in like a cosmic safety net. Some maps even labeled it as a potential paradise full of resources, basically advertising free real estate for future colonizers. This giant imaginary continent became a geopolitical fantasy. Explorers like James Cook set sail partly to confirm or deny its existence. Spoiler: they didn't find a paradise. They found a frozen wasteland that wanted them dead. Antarctica was real, yes, but it was nothing like the warm, fertile supercontinent Europe had been daydreaming about. The funniest part? Even after Antarctica was confirmed, Terra Australis lived on in cultural memory. People couldn't let go of the idea that somewhere, just out of reach, there must be a vast, rich land waiting to be claimed. It was the ultimate cartographic catfish, a continent that never lived up to its profile picture. So next time you see a modern globe with that big white chunk at the bottom, remember, for centuries, people thought it was hiding an entire alternate Earth. In reality, it was just ice, penguins, and death by frostbite. Number 6. The medieval Mappa Mundi. Lies. If you lived in Europe during the Middle Ages, your world map didn't look like geography. It looked like a theology poster. The famous Mappa Mundi charts weren't designed to tell you where places actually were. They were designed to tell you where God wanted them to be. Picture this. Jerusalem is always in the center, like the Earth's belly button. East, not north, is usually at the top, because that's where the Garden of Eden supposedly was. Europe, Asia, and Africa are drawn as rough blobs, all squished together like puzzle pieces a toddler jammed into place. The Americas? Not even on the radar yet. These maps weren't about accuracy. They were about narrative. Pilgrims used them as spiritual travel guides, not navigational tools. Some even drew in biblical events, like Noah's Ark parked somewhere in Armenia, right alongside rivers and mountains. It was basically a religious storybook disguised as a chart of the world. And here's the ironic twist. People at the time knew these maps weren't accurate for sailing or trade. They weren't meant for sailors. They were meant for priests, kings, and ordinary believers who wanted the world explained through the lens of faith. Geography was bent, reshaped, and outright lied about to fit the story of Christianity. So when you hear someone romanticize medieval maps as beautiful old works of art, remember, they weren't trying to tell you where China was. They were trying to tell you where heaven was. Basically, they were less Google Maps and more Sunday school PowerPoint. Number 5. The American highway maps that lied on purpose. Fast forward to the 20th century, and maps were still up to their old tricks, this time with highways. Ever notice how road atlases or gas station maps make the roads look smooth, simple, and perfectly connected? That's not reality. That's marketing. In the 1920s and 30s, oil companies like Shell and Esso started handing out free road maps. But these weren't just to help drivers. They were advertisements designed to funnel you onto specific routes that passed surprise their gas stations. If there was a faster road that didn't go near their stations, guess what? That road might mysteriously shrink, fade, or disappear on the map. Even today, highway maps exaggerate. Distances look shorter, towns look bigger, and certain tourist attractions look conveniently close to major interstates. Cartographers know most people glance, not measure. So they draw roads and landmarks to make travel seem easier and more inviting than it actually is. It's basically catfishing for vacations. The effect was powerful. Americans came to see their country not as messy, sprawling terrain, but as a neatly connected web of highways. Always smooth, always accessible, always leading somewhere. In reality, half those easy drives meant hours of potholes, detours, and arguments about whether you missed the exit. So yeah, even your innocent-looking roadmap wasn't just helping you get from point A to B. It was nudging you to stop at point C, where there just happened to be a gas pump with the right logo. Number 4. The colonial railroad maps that lied about distance. When the British Empire was building railroads across India and Africa, they didn't just move steel and stone. They moved perception. Railroad maps from the 19th century were often deliberately distorted. Routes were drawn straighter than they really were. Distances looked shorter, and stations were strategically enlarged. Why? To sell the fantasy that empire meant progress, speed, and modernity. In India, posters and maps made it look like you could zip from Calcutta to Bombay in no time, when in reality, you were signing up for a bone-rattling, sweat-drenched journey that could take days. But the propaganda value was priceless. To investors and colonial officials back in London, the maps screamed efficiency. Look at how connected we've made this vast, exotic land. Never mind that most locals couldn't even afford a ticket. And in Africa, colonial maps exaggerated the reach of railroads into the interior, making it seem like European powers had mastered the landscape. In reality, many lines dead-ended in the middle of nowhere, built solely to extract resources like diamonds or rubber. On the map, it looked like veins of civilization spreading across the continent. On the ground, it was just one iron snake leading from a mine to a port. The worst part? These maps erased indigenous realities. Villages, trails, and ancient trade networks simply vanished from paper, replaced by shiny straight lines that told a neat little story about empire. To the colonial eye, the map didn't just show the land, it rebranded it. So when you see those elegant old railroad posters, remember, they weren't just about travel. They were about selling an illusion of control. Basically, cartography as colonial Instagram filters. Number 3. The Red Scare population maps. Jump to the Cold War era, and maps took a sharp turn into paranoia. In the US during the 1950s, propaganda maps started popping up in newspapers, textbooks, and even government pamphlets. And they all had one thing in common: giant swaths of red ink. These maps showed the spread of communism across the globe. Never mind the details of how many people actually lived in those countries. If a nation was even slightly sympathetic to Moscow, boom, entire landmass drenched in blood-red shading. China, the USSR, Cuba, Eastern Europe. On the map, it looked like half the planet had already gone full hammer and sickle. But here's the trick. The coloring was psychological. The maps exaggerated threat by land area, not by population. That meant places like Siberia, which is basically trees and bears, looked like a communist stronghold the size of the moon. Meanwhile, countries with dense populations but tiny land areas like Taiwan or South Korea looked insignificant by comparison. The result? Americans stared at these maps and thought they were one election away from being surrounded, red creeping across the globe like a viral infection. Free world, shrinking by the day. It was fear-mongering disguised as geography, and it worked. The Cold War wasn't just fought with nukes and spies, it was fought with crayons. So yeah, maps weren't showing people the world. They were showing them what to be scared of. And nothing makes you lose sleep like a blood-red planet slowly closing in on your borders. Number 2. The tourist maps that trick your brain. Ever notice how tourist maps make everything look walkable? You open a brochure in Paris, and suddenly the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, and Notre Dame are all just 2 cheerful inches apart. The map says it's a 10-minute stroll, but in reality, you're halfway through a death march across the city, questioning your life choices and your shoes. Tourist maps are masters of distortion. Landmarks are drawn bigger than life, while boring stuff like alleys, bus depots, or the 15 Starbucks you'll pass are shrunk or erased. Distances are compressed so visitors feel like the city is compact and friendly, an amusement park instead of an urban sprawl. You're not navigating reality. You're navigating a theme park brochure. And of course, the distortion isn't accidental. Tourist offices and businesses want to funnel you toward attractions, shops, and districts where you'll spend money. So the short walk magically skips over neighborhoods they don't want you wandering into. Some maps even warp streets to make certain routes seem simpler, even if they're not. It's geography rewritten for your wallet. Basically, when you're holding a tourist map, you're holding a curated fantasy. Sure, it helps you find the big sights, but it's also making the city look smaller, safer, and shinier than it really is, which explains why every tourist ends their day exhausted, muttering, "That map lied to me." Number 1. The weather maps that exaggerate disaster. Turn on the news during hurricane season and watch the screen explode with colors. Deep reds, fiery oranges, terrifying arrows stretching across entire coastlines. You'd think the entire continent was about to get vaporized. That's because weather maps are designed not just to inform, but to scare you into paying attention. Meteorologists use exaggerated color gradients and massive storm icons that are often way bigger than the actual storm system. A hurricane symbol might cover half the Gulf of Mexico on your TV screen, when in reality, the eye of the storm is smaller than Rhode Island. It's not technically lying, it's for visibility. But the result is that you think a storm is about to swallow the Earth whole. The same thing happens with heat maps. A 90-degree Fahrenheit day might be shaded bright red, while 100-degree Fahrenheit is shown in apocalyptic purple, like the surface of Mars. This ramps up the drama, making viewers feel the threat before it even arrives. Is it useful? Sure. Is it manipulative? Absolutely. Weather maps are less about raw accuracy and more about emotional impact. They want you to prepare, to react, and, let's be honest, to keep watching. Fear makes good ratings. So, when you're staring at a forecast that looks like Mordor just invaded your state, remember, you're not just looking at science, you're looking at storytelling with a color palette. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.